see people. So I've never actually done this, what I'm about to do on a Zoom. I mostly travel the world and speak in public and speak where I can actually see you. So this is a new way of me doing it, and I want you to be totally comfortable asking me any questions. I am totally accessible. I'm not the guy who's uncomfortable asking and I mean anything. So that being said, as I go through my presentation here, please, if you feel like you need to ask a question in that, just cut me off, or you know, or signal yourself, and she'll let you answer the question. So okay, does anybody have any questions right now, or should I just get started? Okay, I'll get started. So that's me. If you don't know, I was, probably you do, maybe you don't. I was born female. Uh, gosh, 58 years ago. So I'm 58 years old now, and I was born female in Southern California in the San Fernando Valley in 1962. I must feel weird for you kids. I feel so old sometimes, and I can't even believe I made it this far. So I growing up in the Valley, I was a Valley girl, really, and I was in Girl Scouts and all of those kinds of things. And one of the things I think people have a misunderstanding about is my childhood being horrible. And so, today we do talk a lot about trans and trans kids, and the suicide rate and how horrible it is, and all of those things are factual. But today in my story, I'm going to tell you that I wasn't a kid who hated myself, and I wasn't a kid who had a lot of those thoughts. I think I was a kid who was lucky enough to have parents who did see me, even though you see these photos, what I'm going to show you right now, and thank God I have them. But, I was a little girl, but I did not feel that way. And in 1960, I think here I'm 10 years old. So, in the early 70s, late 60s, people did not talk about trans. It wasn't even on the table. Like transsexual was what we used, but it was mostly male to female transsexuals, right? That's what we saw in the media. That's the internet didn't even exist. Nothing existed for us to even have this conversation. So we called that a tomboy. A lot of you might relate to that or understand that a very masculine little girl was called a tomboy because everyone just thought, she's gonna grow out of it. Who cares? But I always say I grew into it on some level. I did not grow out of it. And that's what people were really expecting, for me to just not be this little tomboy, right? And I wanted to be the boy on the block. I wanted to play football. I wanted to play all the boy sports. But as a little girl, you don't get that opportunity to do that. So even though this looks like I was on the football team, I was actually the water girl. But I would always be like, I'm the water boy. So I would go around giving all the football players water. But, I got to wear a uniform, and these things that I think a lot of people on some level take for granted. When you're born in the gender that you sort of present to the world, you don't ever have to, on some level, skirt the issue or be more masculine than the rest of the people to sort of overcompensate. When people would call me she or call me the girl name, and my girl name was Laura, but I wanted them to call me Buck, and so it would upset me. I mean, these are things that are so upsetting when you mislabel somebody who feels one way, which we call today misgendering. And I used to get misgendered all the time. On some level, it's great. I grew a thick skin, and I grew into a way of of learning how to deflect the anger and the hostility towards me, because there was a lot of anger and hostility towards me, which is so strange when I think about it. Why are people so upset with a young person trying to find their space in the world, and you're supposed to be male or female? That's what the world knows, male and female. And so when you sort of lie in between those things, it upsets people. And I think today we're dealing with that at a very large level. People on some level, I think humans need to see what they're interacting with. And it's just my opinion, but I think when they don't see the boy, when you're saying I'm a boy and they see a girl, it upsets people, and they get mad at you for, on some level, misportraying yourself. I think that they think that you're lying to them. Or so I dealt with a lot of people pushing back on me as a youngster. And this is me in in soccer. So I really wanted to do all boy sports, and my parents were incredible. They put me in boy sports. They encouraged me to play boy sports as a girl. I think that I have two sisters. I have an older sister and a younger sister. I'm the middle. and 3 girls. And so I think my father really did encourage us all as women to be very not typical female, right? He got us into sports and really taught us how to compete with guys and be on that level and not let the femaleness, take away from how we could become who we needed to be. And on some level, that did make me a stronger person. And it did make me feel that I could accomplish things as a girl. But inside, I was struggling, you guys. I was struggling a lot because nobody could understand it. When I would say, "No, I'm a dude," "No, I'm a boy. I want to be a boy, and I want to play with the boys, and I want boy toys, and I want everything boy, boy, boy." And my parents did that, which is pretty amazing if you think about the time that it happened. And I could say that again, that my childhood was pretty awesome. Like there I am in the middle right there. And so, I hung out with boys and the boys accepted me as a boy, which is also a pretty big deal. They did not see me as anything because I think they didn't see me as a woman yet. Because the thing that starts to determine our sex and our gender is puberty. So puberty is a nightmare. I know this is one thing, and we might not be trans here altogether, but we all have puberty. And I know every single one of you can have a story about your puberty that can sort of relate to me. And on some level, I hated it. I started. So if you see me here, I'm flat chested. I look sort of, like a little boy. Back in the 70s, boys had long hair, and, that's how we dressed. And so we didn't really necessarily have to have short hair, and we could get away with that. And so I was just a little boy. And so I think all the other boys and everybody else didn't feel affected by me or any kind of pushback, which starts to happen, I think, between boys and girls. And then, there I am in my soccer, which is where I really excelled a lot with sports. I just was a really great athlete. And I think I attribute that to the sense that I could just be a boy on some level. And it made me feel very masculine to be in sports and made me feel very much about myself. And so, again, having a really not a bad childhood on some level. I mean, I got teased a lot, right? I got teased a lot in school. I got teased everywhere I went because you're not a boy, you're a girl. You're not a boy, you're a girl. And so I ended up becoming like one of those little girls that are fighters. And I would literally fist fight kids in school and beat the heck out of the boys. And then like I got to be known as that weird girl who beats boys up. And so that then became another level that I sort of had to deal with. I was always the outsider or the little bit of the weirdo, if that makes sense. But again, I'm going to tell you that I think a lot of those things really helped me to become, I consider myself a very strong person now. And I think having all that pushback created that. So I made it out of childhood, and I made it into junior high school, and I made it and barely made it into high school. And so when I made it into high school, I was already suffering from puberty, and I was already suffering from just a lack of understanding my own gender and a lack of understanding my sexuality. Because, a lot of times people put these two, gender and sexuality, together where they're very separate things. But when you're a woman and you're attracted to a woman, and then they just start putting all of these things together. So I started becoming attracted sexually to women. And so, of course, being a woman, now I'm a gay woman because that's what you are. But I'm like, no, I'm really a dude. And they're like, no, you're really a woman. And I'm like, but I'm not a gay woman. And so you see what I'm saying? Like we get shoved into all of these identity spaces. Today, it's the same way. I would say it's 100 billion times worse today, but we get shoved into these spaces. So I got shoved into the gay woman space, and that's what I was told I was. And I was struggling with my sexuality and struggling with my gender. So I just became the person who withdrew and got into sports deep. And I would not talk to people. I became sort of like that weird loner person, but I excelled so majorly in sports where I eventually started, being sought after by Adidas and Nike. And this was like in the late 70s. And I started to excel so much in running, specifically in the 1500 meter and 800 meters, that I started being sought after by major teams. But remember, I'm that person struggling in my head. All these opportunities are coming to me. School became nothing. I did not excel in school. I did not excel in academics. I became that F student and that D student and that student that wouldn't show up to class, but I would always show up to, track workouts. And so really just focused on my running. And because of that, I became a pretty big runner at the time. And I started winning all the events and track meets and being sought after. But what was happening was my struggle internally. And back in the day, nobody knew how to deal with that struggle. And nobody, every time I would say I felt like a boy, people would be like, you're just a gay woman. You're just a masculine woman. That's all I kept hearing. So eventually you just shut down and you stop saying these things to people because it hurts your feelings. And you just, and also you start to question your own self. Well, am I a man? Why are everybody telling me that I'm not? But why do I feel this way? And then you just kind of get into a space where you're like, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And I was introduced to alcohol, and alcohol became my friend, and alcohol became my lover, and alcohol became my everything, along with running. So I was running, let me see, I think the next, there I am right there. So along with running, I learned alcoholism. And alcoholism basically was like I would go run 15, 20 miles drunk, and I would drink all day, all night, and I would just be constantly drunk because it was the thing that made me not have to think about myself and my life. And I want to comment on, oh, sorry, this one picture, this picture. That's the prom. That's my, I'm like, yay, I got my prom picture. You know, I hated that. Don't get me wrong. But now this stuff is gold, kids. This stuff, like nobody would ever believe I went to the prom. So it's like, there it is, actually. So I never forget, this guy ran on the team with me, right? And then he actually asked me out to the prom. And I was like, ain't gonna happen, dude. And I remember I went home to my mom and she was like, you're going to the prom. What do you mean you're going? Because, you know, my parents knew I was on the lesbian side and they were not happy with that, to be honest. They were struggling with my gayness. And so they were like pushing me to go to the prom. My mother went out and bought that dress, that Laura Ashley dress, because I would not go shopping. There's no way. So she went out and bought that dress. And I don't know if you can see my shoes, but my toes are hanging over the shoes because my mom bought the shoes too and they were too small. So there I am in my prom outfit with my buddy. He's just my buddy, Dave, and we used to run together, and we got so stoned and drunk that we actually went to the wrong prom. So we walked into the wrong prom and we were looking around. I'm like, dude, do you know anybody? He's like, dude, I don't know anybody. I'm like, let's just go back to the car and get stoned. And so we didn't even really go to the prom. We just went and got stoned. And like, that was really at first a horrifying experience for me, but it turned into an amazing experience for me. So to this day, I always thank my mom for making me go to the prom. Not only that, because I get to have the pictures for you guys to see. So, I mean, I was struggling. I don't know if you can see my face there, but I really am not happy. And I think I'm so stoned that I don't even know that I'm not happy. And then, you know, running just really saved my life. And after high school, where I did not graduate high school. I was lost. I had a lot of opportunities to go to many universities because my running was so good and my times were so amazing. And I was a woman runner at the time. And so people were just like, come to our school, come to our school. But then my grades were F's. I did not. So here's the thing that I always like to say. And remember, I was a woman. So in sports, we know sports is actually big in university and schools. And what I notice is that really football is a big deal and your sports teams are a big deal, but mostly they point towards male sports. And so I know this. When a guy doesn't have great grades, but he might be the most amazing football player ever, they're going to try to get this dude into that school on some level so that he can play that sport. They don't do that with women. And they did not do that with me. Even though I had a massive amount of universities coming at me with scholarships, they could not take me because I did not graduate high school and they could not help me with my grades. So I ended up not going to any university, except I went to a city college to try to bring my grades up. But again, kids, lost, just lost. Not knowing anything, not understanding anything, knowing I'm a boy, nobody listening to me, dealing with my sexuality, alcohol, and then I found marijuana, and then I found cocaine. And those were the death of me. Because from that moment on, when I did not graduate high school, that's me. So I ended up lost. I did not have anywhere to go. Somebody did discover me, which is actually, I think it might be the next. Somebody discovered me on the streets of, so if you see the truck I'm sitting in there, I don't know if you can, it's a 1955 Ford F100 that I learned to rebuild all myself and everything. And that's how I used to look prior to my transition. So I was so obsessed with becoming this guy, right? So what does it mean to be a man? This is a question I get constantly in a lot of talks I do. So Buck, what does it mean to be a man? And I'm like, I have no idea. Could you please tell me? Because there's no answer to that. People can ask you, what does it mean to be a woman? I mean, it's a very kind of open-ended question, because I don't necessarily think that you can answer that. But for me, masculinity was part of my being a male and being as masculine as I could possibly be. So prior to taking testosterone, even learning that I could do it, I basically just drove around Los Angeles in my 55 Ford truck, as masculine as I could be, got myself a job in a warehouse. Somehow I got myself in there, and I just learned to just focus on creating money. And so I had no idea that I could actually transition to become a man. Never. No one told me that. All this time during that, I was going to therapy and really trying to figure myself out, because the alcohol and drugs were just taking me out. And so through my therapist, prior to that, I started to, right here is where I got discovered in Los Angeles, discovered. And they were like, you're going to be a fashion model. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, you can make $1 million. And I'm like, yes, I am. And then they totally got me into a studio, started taking pictures of me. And so this is kind of like the beginning. And 1980, I think it was 1983 or 4. And during that time, there was a new genre of modeling that was happening, and it was called androgyny. And so there was a whole new influx of people like myself who were so androgynous, sort of couldn't tell if you were a boy or a girl. And that became a big deal in the modeling world. And so people sought that look. They sought that look. They wanted that look so bad. So if you can see, look at me here, right? So that, I mean, I can't even believe that's me. Sometimes I'm like, wait a minute here, because I swear to God, I look 12 and I'm like 25 years old. So, you know, the other thing that I noticed with myself is I'm quite immature. And I don't know if that's just because I had to live a life of, you know, I'm immature for a 58-year-old. No one ever even believes I'm 58. But, you know, what is immaturity? I just don't act like your average. And I didn't even act like you're at 25. I am there. And I would never even. So there I am, discovered. And there I am going into modeling. And so I'll never forget, people were just obsessed with me. They were like, we're going to make you a model. And I'm just like, where's the alcohol? Where's the drugs? Because there's a lot of that in modeling. And I'm just like, I was happy because they would put lines of cocaine out for me, give me bottles of champagne. And I would just be so messed up that I was just basically a, you know, a doll for them. And so that's how they got to put the makeup on me. After putting makeup, they would be like, look. And I couldn't even look at myself. It was, on some level, I felt that I was betraying myself and that I was betraying my own wanting to be male. But I had no, like, where to go. I had nothing to do. And the opportunity for me to make money was there. So they got me into modeling and flew me to London. This is my favorite picture of all time. I mean, I can't believe they got me into lingerie. That is actually me. So I think and if you can, I don't know if you can actually see my body there, but I've always had a very masculine body, meaning that I've never been very curvy. I've always been very kind of straight and very much like that. So when I did transition, like, my body just became so masculine with the testosterone, because I think prior to that, I did not have your traditional female sort of body, which was also difficult for modeling because they want that at some time. So there I am, literally, I think I'm drunk and high on something there, and then they're just posing me. So I don't know how to act like a lady. I don't even know how to stand like a lady. I don't even know how to stand in pumps. So there they are, putting me in those shoes, putting me in lingerie. And I don't know if you can tell, but they actually propped me up. So they put my arm like this, they put my hand like this, and then the photographer would run back and be like, don't move, and then take the picture, because I was so uncomfortable in that feminine space. And how to be feminine was just it's like I literally had to be trained on how to act feminine. But they were obsessed with having me in modeling. And so I was one of the very first androgynous models during that time. And so I was with a modeling agency called Elite, and they're a very big agency, and they had a new space called New Faces, which were like the new people coming into modeling. And so that was basically right there my modeling card. And back in the day, you would have a modeling card to take to all the agencies, and then they would book you on jobs. But what happened was that I just could not do it. It's like forcing yourself to do something you feel so horrible about. Eventually, you can't do it anymore. And I just started drinking so much in London, and London is a drinking town. And so I just got introduced to more and more and more. And then I stopped showing up for castings, and I stopped showing up to go to the things they were booking me on. And then the last straw was they got me in Paris to be at a big agency there. And I fully missed the train to Paris from London. And that was it. There was no more opportunities after that. And so on some level, it was a blessing. And the agency sent me back to Los Angeles. And this is a picture taken of me um, right when I returned, about maybe within the year of returning, less than that, from London. And at that time, I had been so high on drugs and alcohol that my family disowned me and would not talk to me anymore. Pretty much lost all of my friends. When I came back, I had nowhere to live. So what I ended up doing was what we call couch surfing. And I would just overstay my welcome. I had nowhere to go. I had no job. I had no money. And so basically, I ended up homeless. And that part of my life sticks with me deeply, and makes me very emotional, because even though it's 30 years ago, it's something that sticks deep in my soul, because that feeling of loss and that feeling of not having anybody to rely on, or that loss of not knowing yourself, or that feeling of I'm never going to survive. I'm not sure how many of you have ever been in that space, but it is a very deep, dark space. And so with that comes thoughts of suicide, and thoughts of I can't handle being this woman, and I can't handle not having anything. And so I ended up homeless in West Hollywood, California. And with homelessness comes survival. And somehow I just learned to prostitute. And so if you see me here, this is how I looked on the streets. I would just sort of make myself look as boyish or male as possible. And I would wear very baggy clothes. And I started walking up and down Santa Monica Boulevard until I started getting picked up by older men. And then I would just do an act for $20, because that's how much crack cocaine costs, $20 for a rock of coke. And so I would do the deed for $20, get out, buy some rock cocaine, smoke it, do that just over and over and over. And it probably lasted doing that for a couple weeks. And then what happened was I met a younger man, and that man said to me, why don't you come home with me and we'll hang out and we'll party? When you're on the streets and homeless, that kind of sounds awesome, because you're tired of laying on the street. You just want to get into a space, get a shower or whatever, or eat some food. So he seemed trustworthy and honest, which thinking back, I don't even know what that means. But he picked me up and took me to his house. And I'll never forget, to this day, even though I have no hair, I can, that feeling you get, I just get that feeling of my hair. And he pushed me through the front door, and he said to me, I know you're a girl, I know you're a woman, and I'm going to rape you, basically. And I was like, what? And I couldn't even believe this was happening to me. I knew immediately I was going to be killed. Like, I just knew he's going to do that and kill me and chop me up in little pieces. And somehow my survival instinct came in. I used to, before my chest surgery, I had to bind down with like an ace band. I would, and my breasts were only like this big. They were not very big, but in your mind, you see gigantic breasts as a trans guy. So I would wrap it with I would first put a duct tape, which is like a very sticky, and I would duct tape it. And then I would put an ace bandage, and then I would put 3 undershirts on so that you couldn't see my breasts. And then I was so freaked out that he knew I was a girl. I just tore everything off and then just did a thing with him. And then I said, could you please take me back to the donut shop? And I didn't think he would. He took me back to the donut shop where he picked me up. And that was my awakening. I'm not kidding. I knew, I said right there, God, if I actually live right now, I will never do this again. And I promise I will help myself get better. And I did. I got into a sober program, and that was like 30 years ago. And I've been sober from drugs and alcohol since. I mean, I really feel saved for lack of a better word. I feel like I just got this opportunity. And so I did, I got sober, and through sobriety was when I sort of started to realize that, I am a man. People have to stop telling me that. And I started going to therapy, and the therapists were not. Remember when this is 25, 30 years ago? We didn't even have the internet. We didn't even have this. We had nothing back in the day. We have bookstores. So I couldn't go on Google and, sort of put in their sex change or transsexual or trans or non-binary. None of that existed. And so I was really on my own. And there I was, just like thinking, what am I going to do? I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man. And so I was very much in the gay women's community at the time. So I really identified as a butch gay woman. But in the back of my head, I always knew I was not that. Every time I would bring it up, my friends, my gay women friends would get mad at me and just say, that's a betrayal of us. And, you're going to part of the patriarchy and all kinds of stuff they would say to me. So I would just be like, I'm not saying anything anymore. So eventually I found a therapist, and that therapist was amazing. And she said to me one day, so I had dealt with therapists who would not in any way, shape, or form say, yeah, Buck, you're a guy. Never would they say that. They would always say, you're a very masculine woman. You're a very masculine identified woman. You're maybe gay, or they would never touch on transition, transsexual, transgender. Never did they say that until one day. I finally found a therapist who was a gay woman, and I was one of her very first clients. And I sat in her office for, I'll never forget, for 4 weeks, 1 hour a week. And I would sit in her office and she would say, well, Buck, whenever you want to talk about things, and I would not talk. And so as you see, I wear a baseball cap, but now my baseball caps, most of the time I wear them like this. I used to only wear my baseball cap like this. And that was so that I couldn't see you. So I literally walked the world looking at the ground. I never looked at the world. I always looked down. So I would go to her office because I couldn't make eye contact with you because I wasn't secure in my own space. So if I don't see you, in my mind, I don't see me. And then I'm just, walking the world blind so that I could just get to where I need to get to. And so when I was in her office and I would go there like this. So I'm there 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we would do 45-minute sessions. And she would say to me, Buck, when you're ready to talk to me, please, I'm here for you. And I wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't say a word because I was so scared she was going to tell me you're just a male identified female. So the 4th week, I just remember I said to myself, I got to say something. What am I doing? I'm just sitting in this office every week. So I got this courage in my stomach, and I just said to her name was Casey. I said, Casey, I feel like a man. I feel like a man. And then I'm waiting. I'm just waiting there for that moment for her to say, well, Buck, yeah, I know, I can see that. You're just, maybe you're a gay woman. She's a gay woman. But it was the most incredible experience. It's kind of good. I'll never forget. She looked up at me and she said to me, I know, Buck. And I was like, what? And she's like, I know, Buck. I believe you. I believe you are a man. But now we need to figure. And that woman actually saved my life because I never had one person ever tell me that in my whole life. At this point in my life, there's an actual person who is telling me, yeah, of course you are. And when you don't hear that for most of your life, you never think you're going to ever attain what you need to attain to become the person who lives in the world. And that one thing of that person telling me and validating my space changed my life. And I owe that woman my life because she believed something that I was so ready to hear. I was so ready in my mind to hear, no, you're not. You're just this. And she didn't say that to me. And when she said to me, I don't know how to do it, Buck, but I'm sure willing to help you. And to this day, I think back to her and I think that's a therapist. That is what a mental health care professional is supposed to do. And so eventually she ended up redoing her whole practice. And now she actually opened a gender center here in Los Angeles. And she works specifically with transgender youth, which I think is just amazing because she's such a loving person. But going back to the story, so what you're going to see here is this picture right here. It's the only picture I have of me topless with my breasts prior to transition. So I'm very lucky that I got this picture. So see how small my breasts were? Like I hated them. They were like, to me in my mind, they were double D's, maybe triple D's. And I was not happy with those things, but they were very small and nobody could really see them. But in your mind, when you're a trans person or you're dealing with body, you know, dysphoria, you deal with lots of things going on there. And so this is my picture of me right before I eventually found a hormone doctor. And how I did that is with the help of Casey. I went to a store called Different Light Books in Los Angeles, here in West Hollywood. And probably you guys don't even know what bookstores anymore, but we used to have bookstores and we'd have to go to the bookstore to find things. And so I actually went to this bookstore called Different Light, and they had, those magazine racks. And so it had a magazine rack, and I had no idea what I'm looking for. Zero. I don't know. I'm just in there like, is there a book about a woman becoming a man? Like what is, and I just found this thing that I have to this day. I kept it. I don't know how I kept it through all the turmoil in my life, but it's called Transgender Resource Guide for Male to Female. But I'm a female to male, but they didn't have any stuff like that back in the day. So I took that book and I found all these resources. And one of the resources I found was an actual endocrinologist, which is a hormone doctor who administer hormones to trans people. So I'll never forget, I called this dude up and he's like, you got to bring a note from your therapist. So of course I got a note from Casey. I went to him. Oh, wow. The dude is 80. Not that that matters. Who cares? But he's 80 and he's on a cane. And I'm like, and he's like, hey, kid. He called me Sonny. So I'm like, right on. He's already calling me like by the dude thing. So he's like, hey, Sonny, come on in. He goes, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never worked with a woman becoming a man. He goes, my practice is 30 plus years and I've only worked with men becoming women, but I'm willing to work with you. But you're going to be, he used these words, you're going to be my guinea pig. A guinea pig is basically an experiment. So I was an experiment and I had no choice. I didn't even hear the guinea pig. I was just like, in one ear, out the other. What do we need to do, dude? Because I was totally willing to do it. There was no way I was going to continue to live this way. But 25 years ago, we didn't have anything to see. I had no pictures of other trans guys. I had no idea. He didn't even have an idea. So sad to say, I had a mantra that basically stuck with me my whole life prior to transition, which was, if it doesn't work out, I'll kill myself. And so my mantra is pretty horrifying if you think about it. And when I started taking those hormones, I just said to myself, if it doesn't work out, I'll kill myself. And that was my out to, if I started to look like an alien or like some crazy monster, I was like, because you have to understand the privilege of trans people today. They actually get to see what the future of the hormonal thing will do. I did not have any of that. So, I mean, it's a very scary space to walk in, but you can see how desperate we are to become our true selves, that we're willing to take a space that might kill us. And so it might have killed me, but I took that journey because I had no other road to take at that point. It was death or the journey. And so I started that journey. And this is the picture right before starting to take testosterone, and the first person to be able to sort of do that in Los Angeles. And this is I think it's 1 year, maybe between the first year. This is my first year on hormones. And so this picture is hilarious because you can actually see the growth of my beard. I totally feel like a teenager. Like so you actually go through puberty. So I started reversing and going through male puberty. So what happens in male puberty is you start to grow, hair in these kind of places. And I don't know if you could see, well, now I'm totally bald, but I literally started to lose my hair. I started getting a receding hairline, all these masculine traits, right? My jaw completely changed. My nose started to grow bigger, not so much here, but you'll see eventually just completely different. I mean, I'm sure you can even see now. So that's just 1 year on injecting 1 cc of testosterone every 2 weeks. That was the experiment. And he kept me on that for pretty much the first 10 years of my of my transition. And so slowly we would, kind of monitor. He was good about monitoring blood tests every three. He sort of created that. Nothing existed before that. So he started monitoring my blood every 3 months. And I really attribute my health. I'm in excellent health. And I have been taking hormones for 25 plus years. I'm a female body person. I'm biologically female. I'm not a biological male. So you have to understand, I literally changed my whole structure. Everything you see here now has been attributed to the injection of 1 cc of testosterone every week. Every 2 weeks. That is pretty powerful. So here I am, a happy camper, kids, because I am literally on my way to my space and where I want to be. And so I started really, my whole outlook on life started to change. I stopped wearing my baseball cap like that. And I started wearing my baseball cap like that. And I started really engaging with the world where I never really engaged before. And it was like, I was actually on some level, I feel like I was reborn, and I get to have a second chance at life in the way that I want to be seen in life. And it's almost, I have no words for it, because I just can't believe sometimes I actually made it, and that I'm here, and that I get to speak to you guys, and that I get to be a part of the world in general and show that, it's not about trans. Yeah. You have a question?
Oh, you saw me. Okay.
I did.
One of the students had a question that asked, did you start to look your dad or your father through the process since your transition? That's a great question.
It's a great question. And then you'll see eventually here that I have some photos of my family. But yeah, it totally, like my mom, sometimes she's like, oh my God, you look just like your father when he was 30. I'm just like, well, I guess that means you're really my dad. So it's kind of cool actually to watch that. And so really, I just tell you that I just feel so like happy in my space, and that I feel like I have to share it with the world, because so I started to take the hormones, and then after the hormones, the next step is surgeries, right? So, getting rid of my breasts that were the biggest nightmare of my life. And so then how do I do that? Because again, nobody was doing this at the time. And how do I find a doctor to take off my breasts? And so I went to about, I don't know, between 5 to 7 or 8 different doctors who do chest surgeries here in Los Angeles, that are like plastic surgeons for women who want to have bigger breasts, or, just plain old plastic surgeon. So I thought, I'm just going to go to see these. Oh my God, what a nightmare. So I would go in there. Remember, nobody was doing what I was doing back then. So here's this guy walking in, and I'm basically just in the beginning of my remember how I used to look at my transition? Let's see. So I'm walking in looking like that, right? And like that. So I guess I look a little male, but not 100%. So I go there, and every single one of the doctors were like, gross, leave this office now. That's disgusting. That's mutilation. And I will not do it. There was only one doctor who said, okay, it'll cost you about 10 grand, but you're going to have scars here. And he was just very flippant about it and very gross. And I was like, okay, forget it. This is so disgusting. So what did I do? As I went back to that book, and it's humiliating, you guys. It's very humiliating. It's humiliating to be told you're a freak. It's humiliating to be told disgusting. It's just humiliating and horrible. So there I am with this book again. Remember the book, Transgender Resource Guide for Males to Females? And I went right back to that book. That book is the reason I'm here too. And I flipped through the book, and there is a surgeon who does plastic surgery for male to females. And so I'm like, what do I have to lose? So I call, his name is Dr. Alter, which is totally awesome. So Dr. Alter works in Beverly Hills, California. So I'm like, okay, this dude's going to be on his game. So I go down to see him. The nicest, coolest, old school, like he's super hip. He must have been like 30 or something. He's super hip. He was the head of the urology department at UCLA. He was creating all these new kind of surgeries. And so I go to him, and he's like, I've done a ton of top surgery for male to female, but I've never done anything. I'm like, I've heard this before. And he's like, I've never done this surgery before on a woman to a man. He goes, but I just brought back this new surgery from Europe called the keyhole incision. He goes, and if you're willing to try this new surgery, and I'm thinking, where did I hear this before? Basically, I'm an experiment. So I'm like, I have nothing to lose, and I'll go back to the mantra. If it doesn't work out, I'll kill myself. So there I am in that same space. I go to him, and unbelievable. He does the most incredible job. He's so beautiful. And all the people in the room, the nurses, the anesthesiologists, remember, they've never done this kind of surgery before. And actually, they were so nice. They let my friend come in and videotape the whole thing. So I actually have it all on film, which is pretty amazing. So they were all so amazing and nice to me. Nobody was rude or disrespectful, which is pretty incredible if you think about it, back in 25 or so years ago. So after that amazing journey, this is the very first picture of me in my life on a beach in the world, topless as a man. And that is something that many people take for granted. But for a person like myself, it is powerful to be able to take your shirt off in public as a man when you could have never done that before. And so really, I think this was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after the surgery. I'm still pretty swollen. There's still, they put these tubes in there that drain the blood out. It's a pretty graphic, gnarly surgery. And you have to wear these bags that leak the pus and stuff out. And you have these 2 bags full of pus that you basically carry around with you. And it's really disgusting and gross. And if you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you always ask them to please clean out the bag for you, because I can't clean that bag out. It's disgusting. So that's me, the very first time I ever got to be out in the public. And so from that moment, I decided that I really wanted to create my own body. And I wanted to create my own body to be as now, remember, this is my story. This has no representation of the transgender community at all. This is completely, totally my story and how I wanted myself to pretty much be able to walk through the world. And so for me, it was all about being a man. And it was never about being trans or being any of that other space that we have today. It was all about going from a woman to a man, which is what we used to call a sex change. And so for me, I had a sex change, and that's really where I wanted to live my life. I wanted to live my life fully male. I didn't want anybody to ever know I was a woman before. And so I really worked hard on creating a very masculinized body. And so that was through fitness, sobriety, really eating well, learning how to take care of my body, and learning how to show the world that, you don't have to live under these ideas that just because you're 50, you have to look this way or whatever. So I really also wanted to bring to the world age. We have a lot of ageism in the world. And so I'm really against all of that nonsense. And so I can outrun pretty much a lot of 20-year-olds. So I think it's important that we stop this idea that once you hit this age, you're done, get out of here. So really creating my body physically was, on some level, my body became my politics, and my body became my way of activism. And my body pushed to make people, pardon me, think about what does that mean? Because that question, let's go back to that question that I had earlier on. What does it mean to be a man? I don't know, neither do you. And I don't think everyone has their own idea. So then I decided that I really wanted to try getting into the pornography business. Now, I know that sounds totally insane and off the wall, and where did that come from? But what happened was I married a woman who was a professional dominatrix. And through that, remember, I didn't graduate high school. I have no academic background. I'm the dummy. I was called a dummy my whole life, all of that. I went straight to YouTube and I learned how to code. I learned how to do, I found all these things where I could actually learn to create websites, and I started to take classes, and I learned how to build websites, and I learned how to use a camera and create movies. And so with my ex-wife, who's a dominatrix, we created movies, and that's how I learned the skill. And from that, I realized I went into the porn business with her, but then as I was working there, I saw transgender porn, but that was really all transgender women. There was no guys, like there was no trans men in porn at the time. And so I said, wait, but where's all the men? How come they're only trans women? And that's when the light bulb went off for me. And I never, ever forget this conversation I had with a friend of mine. And I said, I'm going to do porn, and I'm going to be, Buck Angel, the man with the vagina. And the guy looks at me and he's like, dude, you're going to change the world. And I was like, I'm making porn. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to change the world. I'm literally making porn. So anyway, that's what happened. I just got into it. I started making it. I made my own genre. I created the genre of trans male pornography. It did not exist before me, and I created movies like Buckback Mountain, which so that's one of the best things about pornography is you get to sort of play off of the movie industry. So that movie went on to become a huge hit and really just kind of opened up. Yeah.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I had a question from one of the students. She asked, oh, whoops. What is some criteria you'd give to find a good top surgeon for M to F? Oops. And then there's some other questions that just popped up.
Yeah. Great question. So I built a website called ftmhealth.com. That said, I'm building a list of all the surgeons. Now, that's going to be a personal choice. Remember that. So if I tell you my surgeon is the best in the world, you might not think so. So it's so important for each person to do their own homework and to see which results you like. And you have to also understand all surgeons have different prices. So if you can't afford a $10,000 surgery, but you can afford a $5,000 surgery, are you going to save the 10 to get that surgery? Or you see what I mean? So it's really, it's not something I can just like have a black and white answer for, because it really pertains to looking at other people. Now today, you kids have so much. It's like amazing. Gosh, I'm jealous of you. You literally have lists of surgeons, lists of everything. You have pictures. You have YouTube kids out there talking about it. You have all of the things you need are out there. You have so much support, and so many people are rooting for trans youth now. So, personally, I think results are what I would look at. And so I really love my results. I mean, I'm lucky I don't have the scars that a lot of, I think it's only because I have smaller breasts. And he did a thing called keyhole, which is right underneath the areola. So you don't have the scars on this, but not everybody is capable of having that because the size of your breasts or of your breasts matter.
All right, another question before you go back to talking about porn, but this also leads to the pornography. So Josh had a question regarding your time in pornography. How much has the industry changed for trans men today? Also, aspects of the adult film industry are not very well known to the public, but you think should be. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, right on. So there's not still, okay, so I created the genre of FTM porn 20 plus years ago with the idea of creating a genre. And a genre is not one person. So that said, it took years and years. Like trans men just didn't feel comfortable exposing their bodies. And, remember, I exposed my whole body, even my vagina, which is a whole other space to be in. And so by doing that, I was trying to encourage other men. So it took about 10 or 15 years. And now today we have, I would say, nowhere near what I think we need to have, but it's most definitely welcoming to trans men now. And it's opening up that space, because now what we have is webcamming. And so webcamming is also a space that anybody can make their own space. So I'm always encouraging these trans guys, if you want to do pornography, get into camming, because you have control of your own image and your own space. Where back in the day, we had to work for studios, and many studios didn't want to hire a trans guy, or we were looked at like the clown in the room, right? That kind of situation. So today I think it's grown tremendously, and I'm so proud to see so many other guys getting into it. Is there another part of that question?
Yep. So Carson asked, you previously mentioned that gender and sexuality are totally different when talking about the difference between you not identifying as a gay woman, but as a man. What is your personal opinion of transgender people being grouped in with LGBTQ community, which seems to be more about sexuality? Do you think that T should be separate, or that the T should be separate and is grouped with gay people, etc., incorrectly? Or do you believe that the association of trans people with gay people is fine as it is?
Ooh, great question.
Thank you.
So back in the day, we lumped us together, LGBT. We didn't even have Q. It started LGB, but then the T came along because more people within the LGB were transitioning, or mostly male to females, and many of those male to females came from the gay male space. So fast forward, then people just started they sort of pushed us into that space. Now, to answer your question, I would say there's two thoughts for me. One, yes, I think we should be LGBTQ, maybe even IA, whatever, because it's more numbers create power. So in our space right now, LGBT is still very much attacked. We have to deal with a lot of nonsense out in the world. So I always believe that, you know, if we stay a family in that way and we protect each other, we're much more powerful. Now, that being said, yeah, T is more about gender and more about dealing with, you know, as opposed to sexuality. But a lot of trans people came from the LGB part of the LGBT. So for myself specifically, right? I came from the gay woman's space. So it's a very difficult question. And I don't think there's a specific answer to that. For myself, I'm torn because I do think we have different needs than the LGB. But I also think a lot of us still are in that community. So I think for me, I feel safe there and I really like being a part of that community. So, and on some level, I still consider myself gay. So there's that, right? So yeah, I think again, it's going to be a personal choice. Is that it at the end of the question?
There's no more questions as of yet.
Okay. Okay. So Buckback Mountain, that was my very first sort of like big deal film, and it just blew up everywhere, and I got tons of awards for it, and it just like blew up. And then I think then that year I won the 2007 Avian Transsexual Performer of the Year. I was the very first trans male ever in the history of pornography to be nominated, and then I'm still the first ever trans man to win that award, which is a bummer. That was 2007. We're in 2020. I really hope some more trans men really get into that space. It's so important. So when I won that award, it was really groundbreaking and really opened up the whole adult space, and people started to look at me much more respectfully. Prior to that, people didn't hate, that's the wrong word, they just didn't respect me, and they create, you know, sort of, I'm the joke of the sort of porn world. And I just would always think to myself, but wait a minute, why am I the joke of the porn world? We have clown porn, we have gum chewing porn, we have, I mean, you name it, they've got it, and it's porn. And I'm thinking, why am I the joke of the porn industry? It's kind of funny. But I ended up getting respect, and I have a lot of respect there now. And so this is just like sort of one of my photos. And so I started really becoming like this porn star and really pushing my space in the porn world. And, you know, I will tell you that a lot of people have misunderstanding about pornography. And I think a lot of people are misdirected around it. And I think a lot of people hate it for the wrong reasons. And so I'm in an industry that is very hated on some level and looked down upon, even within the trans world. And so many trans men would, you know, come after me and say that what I was doing was really bad, and that more people are going to think all trans men have vaginas and that I misrepresent. And so that's why, if you notice when I speak, I always have to make sure you understand this is my story. I am in no way a representation of anything. I'm a representation of myself, or I would say I'm a representation of freedom. And so that being said, I don't represent, and I didn't do that. And so, you know, that was a pretty kind of sad for me, having to deal with my own community sort of coming down on me. So during that time, I had a lot of people come at me and say, you know, Buck, you're a great speaker. Like, you have so much to offer, but, you know, the pornography thing, there we go. The pornography thing isn't going to get you to that next level. You need to stop doing porn. And no, I'm that loyal guy, just to let you know. I'm the guy that just pornography got me where I'm at today. And I will never, ever, ever leave that space, because I believe in it as educational, and I believe in it as a really great empowering space for me and for many others. So after that, I started getting asked to speak at these like mainstream vanilla, for lack of a better word, events. And I was like, what? So this right here is the very first time I spoke. It's the TED Talks of Canada. It's called Idea City. And so TED Talks sort of came after this. And so I'll never forget this. This picture is really powerful for me, because it's the first time I ever stood on a stage. Now, remember, this is the little girl who was so shy, the little girl who could not look at people, right? The little girl who didn't graduate high school, the little girl who hated life and became that guy, but still like just nothing. I have no education, nothing. And here I am standing on the stage of 600 people in front of me, and I've never spoke to more than one person at a time. It's very overwhelming. And I just got up on that stage. You have 15 minutes to talk. They put a little timer there, and they don't let you write anything. You have to literally speak from your heart. And that's actually not an easy thing to do if you've never done it before. So I just got on stage and basically do what I'm doing here in 15 minutes. And I got a standing ovation. And it was so powerful. Like everyone just came to me and said, that's your calling, my friend. You need to be telling your story. And so from that, it just exploded. And I started getting asked to speak all over universities, all over the world. And then eventually a artist, a famous artist, his name is Mark Quinn out of the UK. And he's done a lot of really amazing work, but he called me on the, I was in Edinburgh, Scotland working, and I'll never forget, he like got my number somewhere and he's like, this is Mark Quinn. And I'm like, who's Mark? I'm Googling Mark Quinn while he has me on the phone. And I'm like, who's Mark Quinn? And he's this famous artist. And he says, I want to create a sculpture, a life-size sculpture of you for this whole new show I'm doing. And I'm like, wow, really? And then he's like, yeah. So he flew me to London. We became great friends. What an amazing dude. And he created this is a life-size bronze sculpture that ended up basically traveling the world. And I have pictures of it in Turkey. I have pictures of it like all over places where, so this is a full nude life-size sculpture of me with my vagina. And it really blows people's minds because they cannot even believe that I'm actually a real person. So eventually what happened was the museum in Adelaide, Australia, the Museum of Art, bought this piece as a permanent piece for their collection in one of their rooms there. And so it's really, I just can tell you, like, it's so like huge honor and a huge space to be in when art starts to become in your space and you become part of art. It's that just took me to a whole other level. Yeah.
Real quick question. Well, it's 5:30, so if anyone has to leave, we understand, but hopefully you guys can still stay. Buck, I think you're too far away from your like the end of your PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm that far. I think I can,
okay.
Let me just pick it up. I can pick it up.
Okay, but a question, if you can stay, please stay. But a question from Jacob, and hopefully Jacob is still here. He said, he asked, or he said he noticed that throughout the years you've gained more tattoos. Tattoos a big part of crafting your male image in your body? Awesome question. Thank you.
Excellent question. And yes, 100%. So everything you see on me has been really thought of. My whole space and how I present to the world has been thought so deep, from everything from my beard to the way my body looks to what shoes I wear. And so I'm very conscious of the way I look because it's very important for me to, I always wanted to present hyper masculinity. So that makes sense. Sort of like I think of Tom of Finland. That was more my sort of idea of masculinity. So my tattoos are part of achieving that sort of type of masculine look, if that makes sense. So I want to run. Do you want me to run through this? I can go pick it up a little bit. So this is the first trans male sexual wellness product ever created. And so I created the first sex toy for trans men called the Buck Off. And so what that does is our clitorises grow very big. So this kind of fits over the clitoris. And so if you see, it has a little bit of a penis head, and it gives guys the sort of idea of stroking like a man. Because I found that a lot of trans men were just disconnected from their vagina, clearly. But that said, I knew they weren't masturbating. And masturbation for me is a big part of really connecting to my whole body. I think sex is very important. And so I created a product that enabled you not to touch your physical self, but at the same time masturbate and have an orgasm. So you're never touching your vagina. You're only just putting this on and stroking like a man. And it blew up. It became one of the fastest selling products in the adult market because it had never ever been done before. So then I just created another one called the Kiss X, which is more for non-binary or people who don't use testosterone. So it's a smaller version of that, and it does the same exact thing. And I get tons of letters from kids, youngsters, or whatever, saying, thank you so much. I mean, I never had an orgasm, and I'm 28 years old. I'm thinking, wow, okay, this is like really important. Then I created a whole line of products for trans men that are wellness products, like soap for our genitals, because no one even talks about these things. And also I created a lube because lubrication is also real quick. What happened was long-term use of testosterone atrophied my reproductive system, and atrophy is the most dangerous thing that can ever happen to so my cervix and my uterus fused together, and I almost died. It popped and I became septic, and the doctor said in 5 minutes I would have been dead if I didn't get to the hospital. So I'm the first recorded case of long-term use of testosterone on a female body a person and what that does to the reproductive. The doctors were like going mad on me. That I was like the new experiment. They were just like, wow, we've never seen anything like this. And they actually, I had it done in Mexico, and they brought my whole reproductive system in a jar. They brought it to me to show me how insane it was, twisted. They said they'd never seen anything like it. My whole production, like my ovaries, my everything was just in complete knots. So I create products like this in order to create conversation. Products create conversation. These things get into gynecologist's office. Here's the picture of me and my dad. So, I didn't have a relationship with my family for a long time. Now I have a most amazing relationship with my family. Like, I love them. They love me. I'm their son. That's my mom. That's my whole family. Like, they're just the coolest people. I put this here because it's a real quick little story of the cowboy hat. And when I was a kid, I always wanted that cowboy hat. My dad wore that cowboy hat all the time. And I'm like, I want that. And he's like, no, because, I was a little girl. And 2 Christmases ago, my dad pulled out the Stetson box and he brought it to me. And he said, you know what? Oh, it always makes me cry. He goes, here you go, son. And he gave me the cowboy hat. And it was really like the first time I ever had that sort of son-father interaction with my dad. And so that hat means a lot to me because it was like the hat I wanted as a kid. And it was like going to make me that man. And so, I guess I'm now the son of the family, which is a big deal. And I speak a lot around the world. And this is a trans kid who tried to kill himself. And so he came to see me speak. And that's a bullet. That's a gunshot that missed. So if you see it skidded up his face. So yeah, and so I really talked to him about how he needs to talk about that story. So now he's out really talking about his suicide attempt, which is really important. And remember all the bathroom issues and all that nonsense. I'm a hardcore activist. So you want me coming to your restroom? I don't think you want me in the ladies' room. So that became a huge hit too. I like doing crazy stuff like that. Then I created a website called FDM Health for all the trans guys out there looking for certain types of resources. And these are all the kids, like, some of the kids I deal with, teaching them, I actually bring products and teach the kids, like, go home with these products and teach yourself how to enjoy your body. And we raise a lot of money. I raise money for kids who can't have, don't have insurance for chest surgeries or things like that. So a lot of community service is very important to me. And then that's my family. That's my 8-year-old kid, and that's my wife. And that's my life.
Thank you so much, Buck. That was so awesome. Does anyone have any questions that you would like to actually unmute yourself and have your voice heard? Because you can do that.
I have a question. Do you think if you were given the chance, you would be born as a biological male, or does that not really matter to you?
Oh no, I wished I was born a male, 100%. I still do. I mean, being trans is not like the best thing in the world. I don't live as trans, I totally live male. So I'm not like, I think today we have more of kids who are, I'm trans. I'm more that I really wanted just to be a man. So of course, if I had the opportunity, I've been born male. But that being said, I didn't, and I really love my life. And I think if I didn't go through the things I did go through, I would not be this person I am today. So yeah, I would have much more preferred just to be born a dude.
Thank you, Owen. Shauna, do you have a question?
Thank you.
I saw you were unmuted.
Oh, so sorry, I'm having camera issues, so that's why I just unmuted myself. So I grew up in the 80s, and a lot of those same things I went through too. Now, I always considered myself to be born in the right gender as female, but I was a very tomboyish girl. I played with the boys, I hung with the boys. What you were saying about it not really being an issue until you get to puberty, and puberty being more of not even them making the change, but more the society around us. There was a lot of pressure to act like a lady, especially in the 80s, for a Southern Black girl. And so I felt that. In fact, it made me question whether or not I actually was both female and heterosexual. Um, because growing up at that time, it was more visible than it would have been for you,
Mhm.
the gay community. But still, again, Southern Black, not acceptable. Um,
Right.
and so that was a really weird time through my teenage years and early 20s. And I just think that that's part of the conversation that gets lost in the current times,
That's right.
because sometimes when people are questioning themselves, the question doesn't always lead to the same answer.
Mhm.
And that's one of those things that I think we don't talk about either. Having had friends in the late 80s into the 90s, who were all along the spectrum, before we had all these labels about polyamory and ace and arrow and all these things, where we were just trying to figure out how we wanted to move in the spaces that we were in, how we wanted to interact, how our relationships worked. Um, I almost feel like now, with all the labeling, they get pushed into more boxes. I mean, like they get pushed into more of a narrow definition of,
Right.
if you say you're ace, then you have to be like this.
Mhm.
Whereas at least, I mean, it might seem strange, but at least when I was that age, it was like we were just doing whatever felt like that's what we should do. And if people didn't like it, then we dealt with that, or else we told them to jump. But like we
Right
just,
on.
there was a little bit more freedom and authenticity
That's
of,
right.
how we interacted with the world. So I just was wondering. I mean, I guess I wanted to say that, but I was also wondering how you felt about that too.
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. I think today we're just so obsessed with identity. There's a lot of identity politics involved. And that's why, I'm old and I went through hell to get where I am. And here I live and I'm happy. I'm a happy person. So what I see is it's stressful for me as an elder in the community to see the kids. I really feel like there is a lot of this desire to label each other, and also to label each other in a way that is like, this is who you are, whether you want to be that way or not. And I'm speaking specifically the trans community. It's become very identity politics in this, as opposed to what, even when I grew up, it wasn't about that. Like what you're saying, we just figured out who we are, we did it, and it wasn't. But I do feel like there's a lot more labels today, and that's just because other things are changing, right? We're saying systematic problems, and those are causing problems within gender as well, and sexuality and things. So we're attacking certain, I think, problems in the whole system that could be affecting that, which is making everybody just sort of do all these things. But we need to get back to individuality. I don't think we are teaching individuality. I think we're teaching this sort of herd mentality that once you're trans, you're this, and you have to lock on, and that's not cool, because all trans people are different. We're not all the same. And they call me a classical trans because I'm transsexual. So I'm not really transgender. I'm a transsexual person, which means like I say, I keep telling you, sex change. Like I went from living as a woman to living as a man, and I consider that a sex change on some level. So I agree with you. I think that we have too much of this idea of telling other people how to sort of live and be, which is really a lot of hypocrisy in what's happening, I think.
Sorry, someone just said preach, so I'll just preach.
Right.
Um,
We can't preach. We can't even preach anymore. We can't even say anything anymore. Like it's so scary. If there's anything I'm going to leave your students with, it's this. Individuality, people. Do not get sucked into this thought process or this way of being. There's no way of being. The way of being is your way of being. And that's really my ultimate message. I don't speak to transgender, and I don't speak to trans, and I don't even speak to LGBT. I speak to humanity, and I speak to human rights. And if you want rights, you got to turn around and give rights to other people. That's the way it works. And so you can't override, like, for example, specifically the transgender community. On some factions of our community, we override voices. You can't do that. You need to listen to people, and you need to coexist with people. Coexist is the word that should be on everybody's lips these days, because instead we're just pushing and pushing and no one's hearing. And, you know, to change a system, you have to work together. You can't change a system by pushing one out and bringing one in. It'll never change. The way change happens is together. And so that's really what I want you to hear from me, because I know there's a lot on your plates these days, dealing with a lot you guys deal with. I mean, just the way we talk, interaction, social media, all of it, it can be very detrimental to your mental health. So I very, very much have to tell you, as an old man and as an old tranny, and I can say the word tranny because I earned that word. And that being said, we need to understand that words cannot be shut out, and words need to be able to be spoken. And when you do that, that's called censorship. And we don't live in a world of censorship here in the United States. If you don't like the book, don't read it. But you need to have all sides of the conversation put in. And I really think you kids in universities should really think to that level. Censorship should never be part of the conversation, ever.
So Buck, I wanted to get into this question when you were talking about your products.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned about how your reproductive organs kind of like twisted. And yeah, so one of the readings that I had the students do, and we talked about this a little bit before the meeting, but was about a law in Finland that required people that wanted to transition to get sterilized before they could actually transition. And I know you had mentioned in email, or we also talked about this, how you were actually in, I think, Sweden, and did some activism with Thomas Beatty, who was the first, I guess, man. So can you just talk a little bit about, I guess, reproductive organs and biological determinism versus social constructivism, like the key words that we used in this class?
And those are the words, my friend. So, pardon me. So yes, I was lucky enough to have gone to Sweden. I think this was like about 8 years or maybe 10 years ago. And they had those laws on the book where, in order for you to be able to fully transition to live as a male, which means to get your birth certificate changed, get your passport, get all the things you need to have the M stamped on, and this was specifically in Sweden, that you had to have a hysterectomy, which is sterilization. And so on some level, we were like, wait a minute, that's forced sterilization. You can't do that. I don't choose to have babies, and I don't really want that stuff. And that's my choice. But if the next guy over here wants to have a baby, that's his human right to have a baby. He was born with reproductive parts, and those are his. They're nobody else's. So I was lucky enough to join Thomas Beatty, who was the very first open pregnant man in the world. And we changed the law. We actually changed the law. So after our big, huge protests, they actually went in and changed the law. So that was a huge marker for us in the trans male world, because today you see a lot more trans men, using that space, and it's their space. I mean, of course, there's no such thing as a pregnant man, but we need to understand that things are changing, and that people like myself might choose to keep our reproductive system and use it, and we have every right to do that.
What would you say if health-wise, what would you say? I mean, I know you're not a doctor, but
okay, so great. Yeah, no, I can tell you exactly what I would say. So that's what I always say first. I say I'm not a doctor, and I also have a show on YouTube that I do called Trampo 101. So when you when you guys are finished here, if you want to go check out my YouTube channel, I did one all on atrophy. That thing gets shown in medical conferences, everything, because I talk about something that's never talked about, my atrophy and almost my death. So what I tell youth now, because here's the deal, we don't have transgender medicine. That's a falsity. We're not training doctors in trans medicine because we don't even know trans medicine. So when someone says, I'm a trans doctor, you better think about what that means, because many doctors are raising their hand now and saying, I'm a trans doctor. So I'm like, but what does that even mean? Because we don't have enough resource, we don't have enough understanding or looking at research of what long-term use of testosterone on a female-bodied person can do. And so I am the first case, like I said. And so now I tell people, when you start taking testosterone, what that does is it removes estrogen. And so they're not telling anybody these things. When you remove estrogen and you are a female-bodied person, that means your reproductive system, which is actually needs estrogen in order to function, will now not function properly. And you start getting these weird cramps. I was having cramps all the time. And all the doctors were like, it's nothing. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like literally debilitating. And they would be like, well, we don't know what it is. That's what they would say to me. Can you imagine? And then I almost died. Then that is not okay. This is our medical system. This is our transgender medical system, and it's disgusting. And so now many trans men are taking testosterone and not being told of the side effects. And so one of the side effects could be atrophy. And so now I get so many emails from trans guys. I'm having cramps, Trampa. Well, they call me Trampa, by the way. So I'm having cramps, Trampa, and I'm not sure what. I might get to the doctor. If you go to FTM Health, all of you can download a pamphlet that I made. And the pamphlet is downloadable. You take it to your gynecologist, and it has everything the gynecologist needs to know in order to help you with what's going on with your reproductive system, because they're not being trained properly. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a shame.
Does anyone else have any questions? I know we've run over time. But Buck, you were so awesome.
Oh, thank you. No,
there were some people that had to leave early, but they said, this is interesting. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And yay.
Right on.
And I'm just getting a lot of thank you for sharing on the chat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I appreciate you listening and being there.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day. All the stuff is up on Brightspace for my Purdue students. And Buck, I will see you next week, Thursday, virtually for the tour.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yay, not a problem. All right.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Okay, bye-bye.